Canadian officials have said over and over, if the U.S. imposes tariffs on steel and aluminum, Canada would respond. Today, the federal government followed through. It delivered a direct blow of its own, 25% levies on billions in U.S. goods. Finance Minister Dominic LeBlanc unspooled the details from Ottawa.
The Government of Canada, following a dollar-for-dollar approach, will be imposing, as of 12:01 a.m. tomorrow, March 13th, 2025, 25% reciprocal tariffs on an additional $29.8 billion of imports from the United States. This includes steel products worth $12.6 billion and aluminum products worth $3 billion, as well as additional imported U.S. goods worth $14.2 billion for a total of $29.8 billion.
The CBC's Olivia Stevanovic joins us live from our Ottawa bureau. So, Olivia, break down the details of how Canada is responding.
Well, Andrew, these new counter tariffs, these dollar-for-dollar retaliatory tariffs worth $29.8 billion of U.S. goods, is in addition to $30 billion the federal government previously announced targeting other American products. So in total now, Canada is retaliating against the U.S. against more than $60 billion worth of U.S. goods in total. And these new measures that will kick in after midnight, they target American steel and aluminum products specifically, and also some other products that weren't on Canada's list before, including computers, sporting equipment, and also cast iron products. Now, federal ministers who made this announcement this morning in Ottawa noted that they don't want to do this because this will increase costs for Canadians who buy these U.S. goods, but they say they're left with no other choice but to defend these key Canadian industries.
My dear friends, whether you're in Canada or in the United States, we cannot let uncertainty become the new certainty in North America. That cannot stand. That will make us less competitive. That's going to weaken us, and that's going to affect our economic security and ultimately our national security.
Now, it is possible we may see even more countermeasures from Ottawa because of this 25% tariff that the U.S. has now put in place against Canadian steel and aluminum, because ministers noted that this new tariff does not only target raw Canadian steel and aluminum, but products that contain Canadian steel and aluminum. So we could see more announcements in the coming days. In the meantime, Foreign Affairs Minister Mélanie Joly had a specific message for Americans during the press conference. Let's take a listen.
Please help us end these tariffs as quickly as possible. And please talk to your elected representatives at the federal, at the state and municipal level. Send a message to the White House. Working together, Canada and the U.S. have built a strong enough economy, and working together, we can bring down inflation and bring stability to the markets.
Joly also warned Canadians that this is going to be a day-to-day fight with the Trump administration, especially with more tariffs expected to kick in April after this pause of 25% tariffs against most Canadian goods set to be over that month in just a couple weeks from now. And there could be more tariffs that the Trump administration puts in place against Canadian goods, including those on lumber, dairy, and Canadian vehicles as well, Andrew.
And Olivia, what else are federal ministers doing to get Canada's message across?
Well, Joly is heading to Charlevoix, Quebec to meet with her G7 counterparts who are also grappling with this new levy from the U.S. because it affects all steel and aluminum that's coming into the United States. Joly says she will bring up the issue of tariffs in all of her discussions, including talks with the U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio. Keep in mind, some of Canada's allies have already hit back, including the European Union, which announced $40 billion in retaliation against the U.S. today. And another meeting that we're watching closely is one that's going to take place tomorrow in Washington with the U.S. Secretary of Commerce Howard Lutnick. He's set to meet with Ontario Premier Doug Ford and two federal cabinet ministers, Industry Minister François-Philippe Champagne and Finance Minister Dominic LeBlanc. Now, Ford mentioned that this meeting is supposed to be about, in his view, the Canada-United States-Mexico agreement and renegotiating that deal. However, ministers dismissed that. Take a listen.
It would be irresponsible not to take an opportunity to talk to Howard Lutnick about what we think is important to build a strong North American economy and why we think these continued tariff measures and the necessary and appropriate response that comes from Canada is not a constructive path to be on. If you're like racing to the basement, there's no real prize for being the first person to get to the basement. Like it doesn't feel like the path that we want to be on.
LeBlanc also said that Canada is not renegotiating this Canada-US-Mexico agreement, especially not at this time. It's up for review next year, and that's what the Canadian officials expect to happen, that these discussions will happen at that time. In the meantime, Ford was asked to respond to LeBlanc's comments. Here's what he had to say.
We're bang on. Tariffs equal USMCA, right? They're basically the same things. If we took the tariffs off, let's move forward. But I think the world of Minister LeBlanc, we get along so well. We talk all the time, and we're on the same page. But yes, there's going to be conversations about tariffs, and as we move forward, we're going to ask them, let's move this USMCA deal up as quickly as possible to give certainty to the world, not just Canada and the US, but the entire world.
Now, Ford had a breakfast meeting this morning with the Prime Minister-designate, Mark Carney. The two had this meeting just ahead of this high-stakes meeting that Ford is having with Lutnick tomorrow. Carney is not going to be in Washington for that meeting, and Carney is not, in fact, speaking with any members of the Trump administration before he's sworn in as Prime Minister. Carney said earlier today that he is open to speaking with Trump. However, he said he would do so only once the president shows respect for Canada. It's still not clear when Carney will be sworn in as Prime Minister. This is expected by the end of this week. We're still waiting for the exact date. Carney is then going to announce his new cabinet, which will then take the lead on this fight against Trump's tariffs going forward, even into the spring election, which is expected to be called soon, Andrew.
Olivia, thank you. The CBC's Olivia Stefanovich live in Ottawa. Now moving south of the border to developments in the U.S. President Trump spoke this afternoon from the Oval Office with the Prime Minister of Ireland and had lots to say about tariffs. The CBC's Richard Madden joins us now live from Washington. So, Richard, what's the latest?
Yeah, well, Trump's trade war has gone global, with the European Union and Canada, of course, hitting back by slapping tariffs on U.S. products, from Harley-Davidson to booze to clothing brands. And of course, this comes as President Donald Trump slapped 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum. Now, today, he met with Ireland's Prime Minister at the White House, where we heard Trump defending his tariff agenda, insisting America will take back wealth, quote, stolen by other countries. Trump goes on to say he has the right to raise tariffs or lower them at the time of his choosing. And one example was his climb down yesterday to double steel and aluminum tariffs on Canada after Ontario Premier Doug Ford slapped electricity surcharges on electricity sold to northern U.S. states. Now, you'll recall Ford later agreed to suspend those surcharges after Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick agreed to meet with him tomorrow. And Trump had his own thoughts on how this all went down. Watch this.
We had a problem with Ontario, and they dropped that when I let them know what we were going to be doing. They dropped it immediately, so I'm glad, because electricity, you shouldn't be playing with electricity. It affects people's lives. Actually their life. I mean, it can affect, depending on weather, it can affect their life, so we can't do that. And it doesn't make sense that our country allows electricity to be made in another country and sold into us. Who did that deal for the United States?
Okay, so of course, who did that deal? Well, Trump did. He signed the USMCA deal in his first term. He called it the best deal ever. Now, that said, Ford and Lutnick will meet Thursday to discuss steps to renegotiate that trade deal along with tariffs. But we're also hearing Trump now adding to his list of grievances with the USMCA, hinting Canada's protected dairy sector may also be on the table, or maybe chopping block, for either renegotiation or targeted separately with tariffs. Listen to this.
270%. Have you ever heard that? We have tariffs on dairy products from Canada of 270%, going up to 400%. You never hear that. Canada's absolutely one of the worst. And we, when I say worst in terms of charging tariffs.
Okay, so it should be said these percentages are not accurate. Trump is, of course, referring to a dairy quota system, essentially, and he's citing levels that haven't been reached. But bottom line here is Canada's supply management system is problematic, not just for the U.S., but several other countries. We've heard it from France and New Zealand who complained they just can't get access to sell their butter or cheeses in Canada. So we'll be following next steps on the tariff front, but we're ultimately seeing that Trump's trade war is causing a lot of chaos and uncertainty on Wall Street. Markets are taking a beating as investors grow increasingly worried that tariffs could hurt consumer confidence, spending, and possibly risk a recession.
And Richard, as mentioned, a federal and Ontario delegation is meeting U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick tomorrow.
Yeah.
What are you hearing on that?
Yeah, we still don't have the full list of names of who will be in this delegation tomorrow. We do know it'll be Ontario Premier Doug Ford, perhaps some federal ministers, with Commerce Secretary Lutnick and various trade representatives. So while it may on the surface seem like a de-escalation, the White House considers this a win. In essence, Americans won't get tariffed on Ontario's energy, yet the U.S. is still hitting Canada's steel and aluminum industries with an extra 25% tariff that started today. Here's how Secretary Lutnick summed things up.
We're going to lower the temperature. You know, he thought he'd be sort of the big man and tackle Donald Trump, but you know you can't tackle Donald Trump. He is the most important, the smartest, the most capable leader in the world, and he's not going to let someone push him around.
Okay, so what to watch for, of course, Andrew, is will Canada or Ontario walk away from a win, or will they spin it as, look, at least we're keeping the communications open. So that's something to watch for tomorrow. But the bigger thing to look ahead to, Andrew, is circular calendars April 2nd. That is what the administration calls the big day, when reciprocal tariffs will kick in, when the pause on other tariffs that link to the USMCA were on pause for a month. Those are expected to kick in as well. So I would characterize this as the fact that the White House and Canadian delegations continue to talk is a positive sign, but the big concern is what happens at the end of the month.
Richard, thank you. The CBC's Richard Madden in Washington.